Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly 30 minutes of Torah study class for the Torah portion of Mishpatim. And I'm going to begin with the brief overview of the Parsha. And I'm actually going to read this brief overview because there's about 53 mitzvahs in the Parsha. So following the revelation at Mount Sinai, God legislates a series of laws for the people of Israel. These include the laws of the indentured servant, the penalties for murder, kidnapping, assault, and theft, civil laws pertaining to redress of damages, the granting of loans, and the responsibilities of the four guardians, and the rules governing the conduct of courts of law in administering justice. Also included are laws warning against mistreatment of foreigners, the observance of the seasonal festivals, and the agricultural gifts that are to be brought to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, the prohibition against cooking meat with milk, and the mitzvah of prayer. Altogether, the Parsha of Mishpatim contains 53 mitzvahs, 23 positive mitzvahs, and 30 negative. God promises to bring the people of Israel to the Holy Land and warns them against assuming the pagan ways of its current inhabitants. The people of Israel proclaim, "We will do and we will hear all that God commands." Leaving Aaron and Hur in charge of the Israelite camp, Moshe ascends Mount Sinai and remains there for 40 days and 40 nights to receive the Torah from God. So it truly is an action-packed Torah portion this week, very, very well worth studying the entire thing in detail. Today we're going to talk about one of the mitzvahs that is discussed in the Parsha that has to do with oaths that you might be required to make if you are engaged in a civil proceeding in a court. So scenario number one is in a circumstance where you partially admit to a claim, you're obligated to make an oath. Here's an example, right? These are the laws of partial admittance. The claimant claims that the defendant owes him $100, and he or she responds that he only owes $50. The law in this case, to support his or her claim, the defendant must swear to its veracity. He or she thereby voids their obligation to pay the extra $50. So if in this circumstance, someone says to you, "Hey, you owe me $100," and you say, "Don't know what you're talking about. I owe you nothing." If you have no proof of that loan, nothing to talk about, and nothing is required of you. However, if your response is, "Wait a minute, I don't owe you 100, I owe you 50, so you pay the $50, and then you can take an oath that you only owe $50 and you will not have to pay the rest." Another scenario that's discussed in the Parsha is if a person says, "Excuse me, you owe me $100," and you say, "I owe you nothing," and one witness comes along and testifies that you do owe $100. One witness is not strong enough to extract money from somebody. You must have two witnesses. However, one witness has the power to make you take an oath in court that you don't owe the money. Another circumstance involving an oath is if you deposited something by someone, right? Then there may be various reasons why you did that. They were watching it, they were guarding that item for you. You come back to retrieve it and it's gone. The person says it's gone. That person has to make an oath, right? That they were not negligent, that they did not use the item, that they weren't irresponsible for the item, and then in many circumstances, they won't have to take it back. So this sounds very straightforward. In every court system today, there are various circumstances that a person might be required to take an oath in court, and the result of that oath is that they would be believed, they're trusted, and they would be absolved from any claim that's made against them. Make the oath and you can move on. However, we see in the Torah that this is not so simple, that the concept of making an oath was treated very seriously. People did not just take oaths to get out of obligations lightly. Let's look at this text here from the Talmud. Now, it's a much longer text. I trimmed it down for the purposes of class. The judges say to him, "Beware that the entire world trembled when the Holy One, blessed be He, said at Mount Sinai, 'You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain.' Things that fire and water cannot destroy, a false oath can destroy. If he says, 'I will take an oath,' the people standing there say to each other, depart, right? I pray for you. So the idea of taking an oath within Jewish tradition is very, very serious. Because of the fact it was so serious, there were people who did not want to do it. To stand in front of a court, swear, make an oath, takes God's name, they were not so ready to do it. So due to their grave severity, we seek to avoid taking oaths. Many Jews were known to prefer paying money rather than undertaking an honest oath. Now, with this information, that historically Jews were not excited to take oaths, and even in circumstances where they're obligated to take an oath, they would choose not to take an oath and rather pay. It makes one of the laws that we just said hard to understand and a little bit strange. At the beginning of the class, we mentioned the law about a partial admission. A person says you owe 100, you say I owe 50. The law is you make an oath on the 50. This law is actually not explicitly written in the Torah. It is derived. The sages have to use various tools of biblical interpretation to extract from the text this law. What the Torah actually does mention is that if you say, right, I owe $100, and someone says you owe 100, and you say I owe nothing, you don't have to do anything, right? Nothing at all. Why? If you deny it and the person has no proof, you don't have to make an oath. Why does the Torah say if you admit 50, you have to make an oath? Why can't you just pay 50 and be believed of the rest of it? The Torah says very simple. A person would not be so brazen to lie. You're not going to lie in court. So if you borrowed $100 from someone, you will not go to court and say, I don't owe you anything. Who could do something like that? But what might a person do? A person might say, yeah, I don't owe you 100, I owe you 50. They'll make a half a lie. So therefore, the sage say, you know what? You're going to make an oath, right? In that circumstance, we're a little bit suspicious. We're a little bit worried. We're going to make you make an oath. So here we have a circumstance where the sages are actively looking for a reason for a person to take an oath. However, based on what we just explained, that due to the grave severity, we seek to avoid taking oaths. So how are we supposed to understand the circumstance? Why would the law orchestrate matters so as to require an oath? Isn't taking an oath so severe that we avoid it at all costs? So question number one is, if oaths are so severe that we normally look to avoid taking oaths, why is it that the sages orchestrated a situation in such a manner where we want you to take an oath when normally we would not? Now we're going to go to another section here of Jewish law that is going to make this even more complicated. Jewish law says, how does a Beis Din work? We call upon the claimant first. If there's a significant loss for the defendant, we call upon him first. Now, let me explain the background. The proper procedure in a court, in a rabbinical court, is that the claimant, the plaintiff, speaks first. The plaintiff says, that guy owes me $100. That's how it works. Then afterwards, the defendant has an opportunity to speak, to defend themselves, and to submit their claim. Now, what happens if the defendant speaks first? Jewish law says it's as if they never opened their mouth. We ignore it, we delete it, it's not relevant, it is out of order. Whatever statement they made is not recognized. And it actually proves that from verses in the Torah. So what that means is, if a person is on their way to court because they were told that you owe $100, the person plans on coming to court and saying, I only owe $50, which would require you to then take an oath. If the defendant speaks first and says, I owe $50, it's as if the person never said anything, which means the person can retract that statement as if he never said it. And when the plaintiff speaks first, and then the defendant speaks second, the defendant can say, I owe nothing, and not be required to take an oath. So again, in the context here, the rules are we call upon the claimant to speak first. However, if there is a significant loss for the defendant, we call upon him first. Why do we call upon him first? Because whatever he says will be considered to be null and void, and we will arrange it so he will not have to make an oath, and he's not going to lose any money. Here is question number 2. Why is there an exception to the rule in a case of significant loss? The way that a court works is plaintiff goes first, defendant goes second. How come we're making an exception? If the defendant stands to lose a lot of money, then we're going to let the defendant go first because it's going to be to the defendant's advantage because the defendant won't have to make an oath. Either we go all the way or not. Why change the procedure? How come we're meddling in the affairs of the courts, allowing for a role reversal in order to aid and to help a person who has a significant loss? Before we continue, I want to make sure that the questions are clear. If anyone has a question or a comment doesn't understand, please unmute yourself before we go on. All right, seems like we're all on the same page. Now, if you want to know the legal answer, the halachic answer as to why the court operates and runs in this fashion, that's not the topic of tonight's class. We want to understand the Hasidic interpretation of the proceedings of this court case. Because every single mitzvah in the Torah, including every single court case in the Torah, has a spiritual parallel that is eternally relevant and applies to each and every one of us, even outside the confines of the courtroom. So even though none of us may be standing in front of a rabbinic court and battling out these issues, the spiritual parallel, that is something that each and every one of us engages in on a daily basis. So therefore, perhaps it even is more relevant. So tonight we are going to discuss the Hasidic interpretation and the practical lesson for us from this discussion about making oaths in a court. So Hasidic philosophy says, who is the plaintiff? Who is the defendant? Who is the prosecutor in this case? This is a case of the Yetzer Hara versus the Jewish people. We have to personalize this element in Jewish law, and we are dealing with the evil inclination versus us. What does the evil inclination say? What does the prosecutor say or the plaintiff say? The prosecutor claims that at the moment that a Jew sins, they are indentured and must surrender. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, Satan, whatever term you want to use, says to the Jew in court, you are a sinner, I own you. You owe me everything. Just as the plaintiff says to the defendant, I loaned you $100, you owe me $100. So too the prosecutor says, we gave you on loan, right? Spiritual sustenance, physical life, etc. You violated it, you abused it, you have committed sins and transgressions. You owe me everything, right? The prosecutor, the Yetzer Hara, says, I own you, you have to pay me back in full everything. What is our response? The defendant deflects this claim by admitting to the sin. I'm not perfect. I'm not a tzaddik. I have sinned. However, I am denying my full investiture. That means I don't owe you everything. You don't own me. I may have sinned, but it was not all of me. And let's see how the Alter Rebbe explains this idea. After the sinful act, however, The sinner's animal soul, which animates the body and is integrated into it, as well as his body itself, return and rise from the negativity and draw closer to the holiness of the divine soul that pervades them. The divine soul always believes in the one God and remains faithful to him even while the sin is being committed. It is just that she is trapped within the clutches of the animal soul that is compelling the body to sin. So the Alter Rebbe explains that when a Jewish person sins, you are not somehow evil, corrupt, given over to Satan in some way and he owns you. Absolutely not. People are complex. There's an animal soul, there's a godly soul. Sometimes we make mistakes, but by and large, we're wonderful, we're fantastic, we're good people. It was a momentary lapse. People make mistakes. We cannot allow that to define us. And suddenly we are totally belong to the Yetzer Hara. That's not the case. Because number one, our soul always remains pure. So there is no way that the evil inclination or Satan can say, we own you. Impossible. We have a godly soul that's pure that you can't even touch. And even more than that, our good deeds outweigh the bad. There is no way that the Satan can claim all of us because we are not all bad. Not only are we not all bad, each and every one of us is mostly good. As the Talmud explains, Reish Lakish said, with regard to the sinners of the Jewish people, the fire of Gehenna has no power over them, as may be learned from the golden altar. The golden altar in the temple was only covered by gold, the thickness of a golden dinar. That's the thickness of a coin, so a very thin plating of gold. Yet it stood for many years, and the fire did not burn it, for its gold did not melt. So too the sinners of the Jewish people, who are filled with good deeds, like a pomegranate is filled with seeds, how much more so should the fires of Gehenna have no power over them. So explained here based on the Talmud, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the prosecutor, Satan, can have no claim to the totality of who you are. Even a sinner amongst the Jewish people is full of mitzvahs, like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. Based on this, the prosecutor makes a claim for everything. Our response is a partial claim. We admit to some sin, but we are not all sin, and we cannot be defined that way. Now, in Jewish law, when you make a partial admission, you have to make an oath. How do we understand the idea of having to make an oath in the court case with Satan, with our evil inclination? What does it mean? So first we have to understand, what is an oath? What is it? What's it about? Why do you make one? So in a legal context, the purpose of making an oath in court is to convince other people of your honesty, your integrity, and your sincerity. That is to make an oath. The reason you make an oath is to convince other people the truth of your claim. However, from a Hasidic perspective, the reason that you make an oath is very different. It's not to convince other people, it's actually to empower yourself. What do I mean by that? Let's go to the Rebbe Rashab. He writes, the godly soul swears to be a tzaddik and not to be a rasha. It's difficult to understand why the godly soul swears. After all, the animal soul, which is the source of all character deficiencies, such as anger, haughtiness, and lustfulness, causes one to become a rasha. If so, why is it the godly soul who swears, right? The godly soul is not at risk or at danger. It's the animal soul. Why does the godly soul swear to be a tzaddik? The explanation is that the word shavua, to swear, is related to the word sova, satiation. Satiation refers to the heavenly assistance granted to a person, giving them the ability to serve God by studying Torah and performing mitzvahs. This is similar to being in a state of satiation, which causes one to have strength, and even more to be in good spirits. This is the meaning of we cause him to swear. We satiate him by giving him the power that can be found in his supernal source to overcome the animal soul and not to be a rasha. This is also true when one makes an oath in real life. An oath obligates someone to overcome challenges and obstacles. The person is determined to keep their word, and it reveals hidden powers that cannot be obstructed. As people say, nothing stands in the way of the will. So too, the oath of the godly soul causes inner powers to become revealed, with which one can overcome all the obstacles and challenges that are posed by the animal soul. So the Rebbe Rashab explains here the idea that when you are facing this spiritual prosecutor and you are being accused of being a fully holy, a sinner through and through, what is your response? Your response is to say, number one, I have sinned. I'm not perfect. I'm the first to admit it. However, I am not fully corrupt, and you do not owe me. And now I'm going to make an oath to that effect. The power of the oath is that an oath awakens your inner strength, which will ensure that you will not fall completely. You're making an oath that's saying, I am not too far gone. The oath is not just a promise. The oath taps into your soul, brings from it powerful forces that give you strength to maintain that promise. So the Yetzer Hara is accusing the Jew of being indebted with the mark of sin. The Jew counters that he or she only sinned externally, then takes an oath to tap into their inner spiritual reserves. So the answer to question number one, why would the law orchestrate matters so as to require an oath? Earlier in the class, we said, we want to avoid taking oaths. Yet all of a sudden, we have a scenario where the court is trying to push an oath on someone. Why would the law orchestrate matters so as to require an oath? From the Hasidic perspective, we can understand it very well, because we're dealing with a court case of the evil inclination against us. Why do we make an oath? The oath is a superpower of tapping into deep godly energy, unlocking potent spiritual powers. So here we have the answer to question number one. However, there still is a loose end. The loose end is, there was that law that if you are going to suffer a big loss, we can reverse the order of you making a claim in court, which is to your advantage. You would not be required to make an oath, and you know nothing. Right? Why? How do we allow someone to get out of an oath? So the answer is, why you'd want to get someone to avoid an oath is to understand, why is it that we want to avoid an oath to begin with? From the legal perspective, the reason why you want to avoid taking an oath, because to stand in a court, put your hand on a Bible, right, and swear in the name of God, that is major stuff. What if you're only 99% sure? You're 99% sure. That's pretty sure. Are you willing to take God's name publicly and make that statement? We're hesitant to do so. It's a big deal. But in the context of making an oath in our spiritual court case with our Yetzer Hara, why would we be nervous? Why would we be cautious? It's empowering. It allows us to tap into deeper parts of our soul. The answer is very simple. What happens if a person makes an oath and violates that oath? And we're not talking about the oath in court. We're talking about violating that spiritual oath. It's far worse. What could you compare that to? Have this ever happened to you that you made some type of New Year's resolution that you are going to lose weight, you are going to exercise, you are going to go to the gym, you're going to eat healthy? Everyone makes that resolution. And you might have even made it publicly and in front of people. And what happens? For 2 days, it goes fabulous. For 3 days, you have an appointment in the morning and you're not able to go. And you end up feeling bad that you missed the gym. So you ate a piece of chocolate cake. And then you feel bad because you ate a piece of chocolate cake and you ruined the whole thing. So there's no point of continuing the diet for the rest of the day. So you might as well have a donut. And the next day, you already had a donut yesterday. You accomplished nothing. So forget this week. We'll start next week on Sunday, right? And before you know it, it's gone, it's finished, and you feel worse. Because of the fact that you made an oath and you violated the oath, right? You made that resolution, you violated the resolution, that itself makes you feel worse, and you end up going off the path even worse. So yes, making an oath can be very positive because it can inspire you, it could strengthen you. Making resolutions are great, public resolutions. They can inspire and motivate you. However, if you make that oath, if you make that resolution, and then you fail, it could bring you to an even lower place than you were before. So therefore, a person might be very hesitant to make that resolution. I don't want to make these resolutions. A person might be very hesitant to make that oath. What if you're in a situation where you might suffer a very big loss? That means, what if you're in a situation where your spiritual circumstances are so bad that you don't want to make the oath because you're worried it'll never happen? I'm making an oath, I'm going to start keep kosher. I'm making an oath that I'm going to start keeping Shabbos. If you know that in your life it's not realistic, making that oath is not going to empower you, it's not going to give you strength. It's just going to destroy you when you fail because it's not realistic. So what is the solution when the Yetzer Hara is saying, you are a sinner and I own you? And you're standing before the Yetzer Hara and you say, I'm in a bad situation. I'm not in the best situation. I'm not prepared to make the oath because maybe I'm going to fail. What does Jewish law say? In a circumstance like this, the defendant gets to go first. You do not have to make an oath, and you don't owe any money. What does that mean? How does that work? I want to tell you a story. It's a story you might be familiar with. It took place with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? One of the leading rabbis of the Second Temple period. He actually presided over the transfer of when the temple was destroyed. Post-temple Judaism, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was the leader, he was in charge. He was on his deathbed. His students surrounded him, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was crying. Why was he crying? Because he says, I am moments away from dying, and I have no idea what's going to be with me. There are two paths open before me, heaven and hell. I have no idea where I'm going. And his students do not understand. His students do not understand how is it possible that he could say that he doesn't know where he was going. So the Rebbe analyzed the story, and the Rebbe explained. How could Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say, I don't know if I'm going to heaven or going to hell? How could he say that? What was he trying to say? He said he never spent 5 seconds introspecting on his life, whether I'm good, whether I'm bad. You know why? Because he was too busy doing things. He was too busy leading the Jewish people, directing the Jewish people, giving advice, teaching. When the temple was burning, he was not busy thinking, am I a good person? Am I a tzaddik? Am I guilty? Was I correct? Was I wrong? He was busy saving the Jewish people. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a person who was too busy to reflect upon whether he was righteous or not. He was too busy doing things to think about his own personal status. How can he stop and think about himself and about his standing while there is a mission to complete? It's easy to obsessively review our behavior and performance and wondering if we're falling short. Am I observant? How observant am I? Due to the circumstances of my life, am I doing all the mitzvahs that I can be? Am I 30%? Am I 70%? Maybe I'm 70%, but I should be 90%. So maybe I'm really garbage. Maybe I'm really doing nothing. Maybe I'm a sinner. It's very easy to obsess about our status and our role and our rank and where we're holding. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did not allow a drive for perfection to undercut his efficiency. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, I'm not about ranking and percentages and scores. I'm about doing. right? He was too busy to get involved with all of this type of stuff. The same exact thing applies to our spiritual court case. Sometimes we're in a situation where we can't negotiate. We can't make oaths. We're not in a circumstance where I'm going to make an oath, I'm going to make a resolution, and I'm going to deal back and forth with the Yetzer Hara. No, right? Sometimes we tell the courts, I have no time to make an oath with you. You know why? Because I have things to do. I have mitzvahs to do. And this is what the Rebbe says in the next text. The years and the energy that God grants us to complete our mission in this world are the property of a Jew. When a Jew is completely committed to the extent that their entire being is doing God's mission, and the entire time and energy are devoted to completing their godly mission to make this world a dwelling place, then they have no time to go to a court case with the Yetzer Hara. If they take time to go to the court case, then they are financially ruined, as their God-given time and power become devalued. They are not utilizing their precious assets. Therefore, we accept their claim, and they are exempt from making an oath. We are certain that they will not fall under the sway of the Yetzer Hara. We essentially saying are, I don't have time to feel guilty. I don't have time for this introspection. I don't have time for this court case because there are things that I need to do. So this is the answer to the second question. Why is there an exception to the rule in a case of significant loss? Why in a circumstance where a person's spiritual life is not in the best shape, do we allow the person to get away without having to make an oath in court? The case where an oath rallying energy to defend oneself is a case where we realize what is at stake. We take the high road to avoid wasting precious time. So the message from the whole Hasidic interpretation of the story of oaths is that it's very healthy for a person to have inner struggles, to evaluate your past, your present, and to think about your future. A person should think about, how have I lived my life up till today? Is it up to snuff? Is it up to standards? Could I have done more? A person should think about that and make resolutions to the future. However, we have to be careful, because this internal struggle, it can be positive, it can be motivating, but it also can hold you back. You have to know, when should you take the oath and when do you skip the whole procedure and move forward? The Rebbe gives a beautiful example in text number 12. The Rebbe wrote in response to a woman, when one feels feelings of guilt and regret about past behaviors, they must investigate which side is generating these feelings. Is it from the Yetzer Tov or from the opposite side? The litmus test is the outcome. If these thoughts lead to greater strength and energy to serve God and to live a life in accordance with the Shulchan Aruch, this is proof that they're coming from a good place. However, if the thoughts lead to laziness or despair, this is proof that they originate from the Yetzer Hara, since these feelings prevent one from serving God. Regarding you, good deeds benefit the soul of your father of blessed memory, not feelings of despair. Surely your spiritual counselor will explain this in great detail. So the Rebbe says, if your introspection about your past leads you to making an oath in court and positive resolutions and good deeds in practice, then that's fantastic. But if you're a person who can't move on because you're always in the middle of that court case, defending, protesting, back, and if you're always in the middle of that court case, you're not moving on, you just got to get out of court. No oath, no nothing. Start doing good today. Don't get caught up in feelings of despair or I'm so bad, what now? Simply do what you need to do, and God will help you power through it. So this is the Hasidic interpretation of the law of oaths that is discussed in this week's Torah portion with such a powerful message. The litmus test of all spiritual introspection, does it motivate me to do more, or not? The bottom line, we got to do. God willing, next week, Tuesday, 7:30 p.m., we will have another 30 minutes of Torah study class for the Torah portion of Truma. We'll be live right here on Zoom. Today is actually the shloshim of my grandfather's passing, right? My grandfather, Michal Raskin, he passed away at the age of 92 just 1 month ago. And right now in New York at the Jewish Children's Museum is a beautiful event, shloshim for my grandfather. It's actually being streamed live on YouTube. I'm going to watch it as soon as this is over. So today is a shloshim, and this Shabbos in Shul, we have a very special kiddush, deli from Romanian in Chicago, fabulous deli sandwiches, matzah ball soup, a wonderful kiddush, where we're going to honor the shloshim of my grandfather. I hope everyone is able to attend, although I do understand COVID, people are worried, so no pressure, but we are going to honor my grandfather at the shloshim today. I also want to mention that Wednesday, February 2nd, begins our next 6-week JLI course. It's called Meditation from Sinai, Mindful Awareness and Divine Spirituality to help you think, feel, and live more deeply. We're going to be discussing some of Judaism's strategies, how to live the most successful life possible, but we're going to look at how you can integrate them, how you can use meditation, which meditation just means a method of thinking where these ideas actually become part of you and you can live them in the fullest way. Any questions, comments, suggestions before we close tonight?
You want to watch the video, the shloshim.
If you want to watch the shloshim, there's a website you should go to, collive.org is the name of the website.
collive.org?
Yeah, COL Live, and it's going to make sure I have it right here.
Okay.
collive.com. So collive.com,
Yes.
and you'll see right at the top of right on the website, it says Live Shloshim of Michal Raskin, and you can click on it.
Okay, thanks.
All right.